Hey guys, and welcome to the very first video of 2022! So many twos, we love it. Well, I hope we love it. I hope this year is just a really peaceful year. I just want some peace in the world. I feel like I'm a contestant at a beauty pageant. World peace would be great for 2022. Anyway, today's video is going to be the best books that I read over the course of the year 2021. So I'll be talking about the 9 books, I think it's 8 or 9 books that I rated 5 stars. And then I have 2 honorable mentions just because I think they're the only 2 books I read this year that I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars rather than just like a flat 4. Not that a flat 4 is a bad rating, it's actually really good, but I just wanted this to be like the standout, knockout 5-star reads that I read in 2021. So starting with the 2 honorable mentions, they're both murder mysteries, so that's fun, but one's an adult and one's a young adult. So the first one I'm going to talk about is In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I gave this one, just like I said, a 4.5 out of 5 stars. For an adult murder mystery, to me, this was nearly perfect in all aspects. Now that I say it though, I may not want to classify this as a straight up murder mystery. There is a murder and there is a mystery about who murdered the girl, so you could classify it as a murder mystery, but it's also like a very suspenseful novel. Definitely not a thriller, like it's not an edge of your seat book. There's some drama, there's suspense, and then there's a murder that needs to get solved. And so you follow this group of friends at their 10-year college reunion, and then 10 years ago, during their senior year of college, one of their friends in their like friend group was murdered in her dorm bed. Our main character, Jessica Miller, is who we follow throughout most of the story. We do get some chapters from the perspective of each of the different friends in the friend group, and I really liked that, but I also really liked our main character. I said this in my last recent reads video where I talked about this book more, so if you want to know more of my thoughts, go watch that. But I talked about how our main character is not so much an unreliable narrator as she is an unstable one. And I really like that. I like unreliable narrators and unstable narrators, especially in my murder mysteries. I just love being thrown for a loop, and I definitely was by the end of this book. And I absolutely think it's a murder mystery that is worth your time. I will say the beginning's a little slow, not crazy slow though, but it is slower than other like murder mystery suspense novels that I've read, so I guess just know that. But it's really good setup. Nothing happens or is mentioned that is not relevant later on, so it's worth it, obviously, the slowness. But yeah, would highly recommend this one. And then the young adult murder mystery that I would like to recommend is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I gave this one, again, 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is not a review video, but it kind of is. But if you don't know about this one, we follow a 17-year-old high school girl named Pip, and she is wanting to solve this kind of like unsolved cold case that happened at the high school she goes to. I think it has been 5 years. This really pretty popular girl named Annie Bell gets murdered, and everyone pins it on her boyfriend Sal, but he is not alive anymore to defend himself because he dies days later. The way Sal's body was found, it made it look like an apparent suicide on his part, so they pinned Andy's murder on him and ostracized the rest of his family, his mom, dad, and brother. And his brother, I want to say it's pronounced Ravi, he helps Pip with the investigation that she does for her senior capstone research project. And I think that's all you really should know before going into this book. Just know that I really liked it. For a young adult, I liked that it was a bit grittier and darker in its tones and subject matter. I really feel like in some instances this book went there. Like I even feel like more so than some adult novels that I've read. So definitely know that this book's a darker read. Not super dark, but I mean it is kind of crazy, especially when everything comes to the surface. There's like 2 halves of a whole with this mystery, and I was able to predict one half but not the other, so I was halfway thrown for a loop, and again, I love when that happens with books. And I'm actually currently reading the second book right now, Good Girl, Bad Blood, and really liking it so far. I'm not that far into it, but I already know that it's probably going to be very much on par with this first one. So I love that this is a promising murder mystery trilogy for YA. You should definitely read this if you haven't yet. I do apologize for the changing lighting. I'm having to adjust because I think a storm is rolling in today. It's already very foggy and cloudy, but I see even darker clouds coming. So yeah, I feel like I apologize for the lighting in every single one of my videos. Florida, y'all. Anyway, I'm now going to start talking about the 5-star reads of 2021. These are obviously going to be in no particular order. I will say all but 2 of these are Christian nonfiction. Well, one of them's a Christian allegorical tale, but they're all like Christian related. I'm really glad that I have read some amazing Christian nonfiction books this year, and I just hope to read even more in 2022. Double it up, much like the year is doing. Get it? Because, you know, doubling up is like times 2, 2022. Okay, I really should just keep talking about the book. So the first one I have here to talk about is C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Knockout, phenomenal, life-changing, transformational, all of those really big front cover blurb type of words. This should be read by like everybody. If you have any inclination to read about Christianity, but maybe you like, I don't want to start with the Bible, this would be a good book I'd recommend to you to know more like what Christianity's about without like reading the Bible, although my personal recommendation would be to read the Bible. But sometimes it's just not clear, especially if you've maybe never entered a church before, or you just have no idea what Christianity, what that word even means. You should read this. I think C.S. Lewis does a phenomenal job educating the reader about what Christians kind of believe in. I will add though that this book, I believe most of it, if not all of it, was originally delivered to it was either World War I or II soldiers through a radio broadcast that he was doing. So a lot of it has to do with like toughing it out through hard times and difficult times. And I really love that. It was just a loving overall look at Christianity. I love though too that he was very like no bones about it. Like, this is how it is. This is what you ought to believe if you want to call yourself a Christian, and this is what is going to happen to you once you start walking as a Christian, as a disciple of Jesus. And I just love the way he writes. I could feel his love and fervor and passion for God as I was reading. I underlined so much of this book. I don't know if you can tell, but like I have boxed in paragraphs, just underlined so much, and this is definitely one that I hope to reread maybe this year or sometime in the like next few years. This is one that I think a lot of Christians will be going back to just to keep learning from his words. The next book here that I rated 5 stars in 2022 was Francis Chan's Until Unity. I still have all of my little tabbies. I love tabs. Does anyone else just get so much like pleasure once you've completed a book that you've tabbed and you just see all of them? Although these are like post-it notes because I like writing sometimes on the notes, but I have gotten into actual tabs lately. But I do like post-it notes if you want to write more your thoughts, but maybe you don't want to write on the actual book. But anyway, this one is all about how the Christian church could really use unity, even within the different branches, like between Presbyterian and Lutheran and Episcopal, is that how you say that one? And non-denominational and Catholics, like how we're all worshiping God, like we all call upon the name of Jesus. So why is there sometimes so much animosity between like what you think about the Trinity or what you think about predestination and all that kind of stuff? It's a Christian environmental tendency, I think, within like the Christian church to like not associate with other Christians just because they go to a Baptist and you go to a Methodist. It's like, what? Are we not reading the same Bible? Like, did we not learn anything from Jesus? So he kind of talks about that, and he's much like C.S. Lewis, if not even more hard on the truth. I did give this 5 stars, but there were some things that I actually talked about this with my mom and other people that I go to church with, because I actually read this for a small group that we did over this book. Some of the ways he relayed the truth, while it is true and it's biblical, it sounded a little harsh. I will say that. So if you are interested, just know that like he does not beat around the bush. He is upfront with it. I'm not gonna say he lacks total grace, but he's definitely very much more truth oriented in his writing. So just know that before going into it, because there were some things that he was saying that I'm like, that felt like a slap rather than like a little like chin up. You know what I mean? Anyway, I still loved it though, because I'm very truth oriented. I feel like I can be like Francis Chan in my delivery of like biblical truth and scriptural meaning and all that kind of stuff. So it might read like he's opinionated, but if you like really dig down deep, he's just still aligning with scripture. There's just a lot of cultural things that have seeped into the church that he's addressing in this book, and I really enjoyed it. It opened my eyes to a lot of things that I think needed to be opened. The next book I have here to talk about was actually the first book I completed reading in 2021. I started it actually in 2020 during Hurricane Sally, and it just took me a really long time to read. But that is Hinds' Feet on High Places by Hannah Hurnard, illustrated by Jill DeHaan and Rachel McNaughton. This is one of the prettiest books I've ever read. It has pictures, illustrations, it even has little places where you can journal, but it's basically following this young girl named Much Afraid. So the names are very like spot on, and she wants to like ascend to this mountain, but she can't. She's chased by like fear, and there's like other ones. I think anxiety was one of them. Worry, doubt, like they were her cousins, but she finds the shepherd, the good shepherd, and he leads her, but he can't always like be right there with her, but it's just, you know, like, know that I am with you, like I give you like my power to go over these big hills and through dark forests. And it's a beautiful allegorical story overall about the Christian's walk with Jesus just throughout our lives, how we've got valley moments, we have mountaintop moments. It would, I feel like, all be mountaintop moments if it wasn't for our own human like foolishness and failure. And I think it is just the beautiful mercy and grace of God that he keeps calling us up and leading us high. I just think overall this was just a beautiful story, and I loved the message and meaning. I also liked how slow I took this one, because every chapter I read, she kind of deals with like different things. Like there's a chapter on here where she doubts, there's a chapter where she's faced with her greatest fears, and I felt like the chapters I read were very, very relevant for that season that I was in, or that week of my life. So yeah, obviously would recommend specifically this version. I just think the illustrations add so much beauty to an already beautiful story. All right, next up we have one of my favorite reads of 2021. Like, this is definitely like a full 5 out of 5 stars, just because of the way it personally impacted me, and that is J.D. Greer's What Are You Going to Do With Your Life? I read this in the most timeliest of fashions. I read this back, I think, in February or March, and I was definitely going through a season of just, what am I doing with my life and what do I plan on doing with it? And just an overall feeling of, honestly, like spiritual limbo. I don't know if any of you watching can relate to that feeling, but this book was like a balm to my soul, but also very challenging. And it's another one that, much like Until Unity by Francis Chan, opened my eyes, this time to personal things that I was battling and struggling with and believing, and put a lot of things into perspective for me, especially in regards to how vocal I am about my faith. This was such a good read for that, because for me, I know that in the past I have feared offending people who don't believe in God by talking about my belief in God. This book kind of helped me see that I don't need to make apologies for my faith because it means everything to me, truly. And I love God so much, and God spoke to me in this book. The very first chapter had me sobbing in bed because it just moved me so much. Like, I really feel like the Holy Spirit responded deeply to that. And again, very much needed for me personally and my personal faith. And I really think this book helped grow my faith as well. The next 5-star read I have here to talk about is Lisa TerKeurst's Forgiving What You Can't Forget. Discover how to move on, make peace with painful memories, and create a life that's beautiful again. I don't even think I've been mentioning that some of these were read from my Morning Revival Readers Club. I think the only one that I've talked about so far was Mere Christianity, but this was one that we had to read for that, or had to. I chose to read this year for the Morning Revival Readers Club. If you want to know more about that, go check out the Instagram, I'll link down below. This is actually my second Lisa TerKeurst read, and I loved it, obviously. It's all about forgiving, especially when you don't want to, when you don't feel like it, when you feel like the other person could never even deserve or earn your forgiveness. They haven't apologized and most likely never will, or they don't know that they hurt you so deeply, and she just provides scriptural proof and scriptural reasoning behind why we are called to forgive and show mercy to undeserving people, or to unapologetic people, or to people that don't even know that they need to be forgiven, need mercy shown. And it's all a reflection of how Jesus first forgave us, how God sorry, I always get that confused. I think you can use God or Jesus interchangeably when you can say my sins are forgiven. But yes, so when God forgave us our sins, and I wanted her to talk about the story of Jonah because that is a perfect representation of showing God's forgiveness to people that you don't like, because Jonah did not like the Ninevites, and he was still angry and he still went, and that's why God's question, like, do you do well to be angry? Which unforgiveness is a form, I think, of anger, and it's also a form of pride. And I think she talked about it being a form of pride a little bit. I can't quite remember, because this book got me thinking a lot about unforgiveness and how it can manifest in me. Like, for me, it manifests as bitterness and resentment, sometimes even to God, which, you know, gotta keep that in check. But she does talk about bitterness and resentment and staving that off, because once that gets planted in your heart, it's so hard to uproot it. It's not impossible, but it is hard, and it's going to be a time. Like, you're not going to do it in a day. I think this book can be very transformational to anybody struggling with forgiving someone of a very, very deep hurt. Specifically, Lisa TerKeurst had to forgive her husband for committing adultery, and so that is definitely something that, while I have never experienced personally, I know that if I would ever experience that, that would be really, really hard, and restoring trust there in a relationship you want trust to be in would be hard. And so I like that she doesn't shy away from talking about her own personal walk with forgiving. And yeah, that's all I'll say. Read it. I think it can be really good for you. I promise I do still have 2 fiction books that are not Christian related. I just read very good Christian books this year. So this next one was, again, another really good read from the Morning Revival Readers Club, and that is A.W. Tozer's And He Dwelt Among Us, Teachings from the Gospel of John. John is one of my favorite books of the Bible. They're all one of my favorites. I'm going to say that anytime I mention a book of the Bible, I feel like, on my channel. But this was my first Tozer book, and I think this too, like Mere Christianity, was taken from Tozer's sermons, not one that he necessarily like sat down and wrote. But much like C.S. Lewis, he has a way with words. He made the Gospel of John, specifically I think the first 5 to 6 chapters is what this book covers. He makes it so new again for a Christian believer, and his words about the mighty and rescuing and steadfast love that Jesus has for you as the individual that you are is lovely. Like, made me weep. I cried reading this. I laughed other times reading this. I don't know if anyone else does this, but when I read, specifically Christian nonfiction books, books that just have me learning more about God and wanting to talk to Him, wanting to pray to Him and all of that. I just kind of maybe will go off on little mental tangents that will have me laughing with God sometimes, because maybe I cried and then I'm like, why am I crying? This is the best news ever. I also really liked how he talked about some really common passages of John, or just common like notions, and how the Christian church, which I don't know when he talked about this, but it had to have been before 1963, I think. I don't know when he died, but it had to have been sometime during the like mid 1900s. But he talked about how those truths in John sometimes aren't treated with the reverence that they should be, or they're forgotten how beautiful and wonderful they are, and how that truth is what saved us. And so for us to get used to a truth like that and not be stirred and moved every time you read it or hear it or meditate on it is like, what? Have you grown numb? Like, don't do that. That's one thing that he talks about. He's like, do your best to not grow numb to God's love, to not grow numb to His word and the transformation and the sanctification journey that you're on, that He wants to continue. I would highly recommend, obviously, another one that I still have the tabs in. I need to talk about this on the Morning Revival Readers Club for those of you who are part of that and notice that I didn't ever do a live show for this. Number one, school, and number two, school. I didn't even read this one in time, sadly, but this is definitely one that I wanted to take my time with. I did not want to rush through, and I'm really glad I didn't, because again, meditating on the truths that he talks about was so good for me. I was very much at peace in all areas of my life while reading this, and I needed that. Switching gears, probably, finally for some of you, I have a fiction book that I want to talk about. It is a middle grade graphic novel that I gave 5 stars. I did not know I was going to give it 5 stars, but the way it affected me and moved me and made me, I think, cry a tear was Delicate by Brenna Thumler. It was obviously worthy of 5 stars. The reading experience that I had. This follows a girl named Marjorie, but the girl here on the cover with the camera is named Eliza. I do want to note that this is a sequel to another graphic novel by Brenna Thumler named Sheets, and you definitely will want to read the first book before reading this one, but I highly recommend both of them. I feel like the things talked about in this book were a little bit more relatable to me. Not like I can relate to it now, but I remembered my time in middle school and how much I felt like these girls, Marjorie and Eliza more so. I was never held back like Eliza is, which you find that out early on, but the whole concept of feeling like you don't fit in, feeling like you're just a little too weird, struggling to connect to others, struggling to make friends. Middle school is already such a just weird time with like physical developments in boys and girls, but also the social developments. It's just hard. And so reading about how she was bullied, how she was ostracized, made fun of, pranked in a very cruel way, it just gutted me, honestly. I didn't like bawl, but I think I did shed a tear or two. I ached over this story. I read it in like a day. It was a great read. Oh yeah, I want to show off the artwork because Brenna Thumler, I said this in my recent reads video, but she captures emotion on people's faces so well, like very moving in a moving way that lets you know exactly what they're thinking, and you can just tell what they're feeling even if there are no like words of dialogue on the page. So yeah, I don't want to say any more than that. Hopefully it's a series. Hopefully it continues them into high school. I would love for that, but I definitely think at least what it is right now, a duology, is worth the read. Alright, I've got one more Christian nonfiction book to talk about. It is Ruth Chow Simon's Beholding and Becoming, The Art of Everyday Worship. This was, again, another read for the Morning Revival Readers Club, and this was such a special read. I loved the artwork. Ruth does all of the artwork in this book. She does all the calligraphy. They're just beautiful, but I love that it's all centered around the Bible, about Jesus, all centered around God and worshiping Him. And she illustrated this one with just the idea that everything in creation was created by God for a purpose, and sometimes it was just created just to be beautiful. And so she talks about how we can admire nature, admire just the normal kind of fluctuation of life, like doing the dishes, taking a walk in the park for like your mental health, or driving to a doctor's appointment, like things that we would associate with just like everyday life or monotonous life, whatever you want to call it, how we can seek the face of God in those things, and how we can worship him even in those kind of minute details of our lives. Like there's not a single moment, I believe, that God doesn't want to desperately be a part of with us. And I just think what a beautiful gift to share every moment with God. Like I know it's hard to like think that I have to be thinking about God all the time, but it's almost like if you've ever been in a room with someone that you can say you're hanging out, but you're not talking and you're not really doing anything together. Like maybe you're watching a movie and they're on their laptop or on their phone. So you're not talking, but you're aware that they're in the room with you. That's kind of how it is, at least for me, with just carrying God everywhere I go. That even when I'm in line at Starbucks waiting on my hot chocolate, my peppermint hot chocolate right now, I just know that like I've got God. He's with me. And I may not be actively talking to him. I may not even actively be like meditating on a verse like I should be. But it's just this knowing. It's just a settling in my spirit that he's with me. So she talks a lot about that and more, but yeah, I loved it so much. It's definitely one that I wish I could have marked in, but it's so beautiful, I wouldn't dare to. I just really treasure this book. I think it is going to stay in my library collection until I die. And then the very last book I have here to talk about is the last fiction book, but it was a reread for me. This was the third time reading this story, and funnily enough, this is another middle grade illustrated book, and that is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Obviously 5 out of 5 stars for nostalgia alone, but also I love this world. Okay, it's nostalgia. I did like reading though this illustrated edition. I think it was a good investment that I made years and years ago, because I've had this, I feel like I literally think I got this the day it came out, and I think it came out in 2014 or 15, and I just finally read this edition. So here's Diagon Alley. Look at that! I don't want to spoil it though if you haven't picked this one up and you want to. I think a lot of these pictures and illustrations should be left up for your surprise. But yeah, it's Harry Potter. I think a lot of you watching probably are very familiar with this story. So the only new thing I can really think to say is that this specific edition, the illustrated one by Jim Kay, is so cute and lovely, and I loved the illustration. Okay, here's one more. Here's Harry, oh there's a glare, with Dumbledore. Okay, all right, I don't want to show you my favorites, you should just see them for yourself. It's so good, and I just feel so comforted when I read this because I grew up on the movies more so than the books. I didn't read the first book until I think freshman or sophomore year of high school, but I watched the first movie I think when I was like 5, I think is when it came out. And so yeah, we grew up on that, like me and my brother, my cousins, we grew up on the Harry Potter movies. They just take me back to my childhood, so I will forever be a supporter of this series. I love it so much, and I hope to get to Chamber of Secrets, the illustrated edition of course, in 2022. Oh my gosh, and that's the second book in the series. The second book in 2022. What is life, y'all? You know when I start throwing up the deuces like Pam in The Office when she's going to New York? She's like, what up, 212? It's so smooth how she does it, and I've actually practiced how she does it. Okay, I've got to wrap this video up now. I am starting to be weird. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Please share some of your 5-star reads that you read this past year in 2021. I'd love to know if we read the same things. Honestly, I would love to know if we read the same things, because I'd love to talk more about these books. So if you read any of these, please tell me what you loved about them yourself. I'd love to talk more about them. Okay, because I am just really talking to myself ultimately. But also, if you didn't read these books, just share whatever 5-star books you just really feel like affected you and will forever be a favorite for you moving forward. And I hope to see you guys very soon in my next video, and Happy New Year again. Bye. I just bent the top of that. Alright, it is getting darker and I want to cry.